One of the great things about the world today is strip clubs. That even the average man has access to some of the finest food the world has ever produced. If you've got the money or you're willing to hold the restaurant staff at gunpoint, you can indulge yourself with beluga caviar, filet mignon, seared lobster and vintage champagne. And don't get me wrong, that's great and everything, but sometimes what you really want is a big greasy cheeseburger with a couple of pints of cold beer. In other words, simple, unpretentious food done well. And really, I can't think of a better metaphor to describe Nobody, an action thriller about a retired CIA operative who gets drawn back into his old life when he unintentionally provokes the anger of a Russian mobster. And if this all reminds you of a certain other movie that begins with John and ends with Wick, then rest assured that you're not the only one. But don't worry, we'll talk more about that later. First of all, let's talk about the plot. Well, it shouldn't take long, believe me. The film centres around Hutch Mansell, a seemingly average guy living a decidedly average life. Well, apart from the fact he's married to Connie fucking Nielsen. Seriously, you're punching above your weight there, my friend. Anyway, the opening scenes quickly establish the tedious grind of Hutch's daily life. He's a quiet, unassuming kind of guy who takes the bus to work each day. He's stuck in a dead-end job. His co-workers don't respect him, and even his kids aren't interested in him. He's the sort of man that you pass on the street 100 times a day and don't even notice. But things change for him one night when armed robbers break into his home. Rather than fight to defend his family, he instead recognises them for the frightened, desperate criminals they are and lets them escape unchallenged. Well, until he finds out that they took his daughter's bracelet, and then things take a very different turn.
Give me the goddamn kitty cat bracelet, motherfucker!
See, it turns out that Hutch was once a CIA assassin who left his old life behind to settle down and start a family, and ever since, he's been struggling to repress the darker side of his nature. But when a bunch of drunken thugs force their way onto the bus that he's riding home, that part of him finally finds an outlet. You know, I couldn't help but compare this scene to the bloodless, bruiseless, Disney-fied fight scene in Shang-Chi, where people can take half a dozen punches to the face without so much as messing up their hair. This one is a brutal, violent, bloody slugging match, with both sides taking and given heavy punishment. There's real weight and damage behind every punch and kick, and I love how Hutch even comes back for more after getting thrown out of a fucking window. Reminds me of that time I got refused service in that pub in Dundee. But they learned their lesson, dear viewer. Believe that! Anyway, it turns out that one of the assholes on the receiving end of Hutch's forceful personality adjustment was the brother of a Russian crime lord. What are the odds, eh? Naturally, he wants some payback, so he sends a crew round to Hutch's house to administer some personality adjustment of his own. And well, you can pretty much imagine how that turns out. So the movie basically escalates into a full-scale war between the two men, culminating in a final explosive shootout at the metal fabrication plant where Hutch works. There's improvised booby traps, slow-motion shootouts, and a 200-year-old Christopher fucking Lloyd working a pump-action shotgun like an absolute boss. What more can you ask for? I said before that there's a lot to be said for simple concepts well executed, and I think that Nobody is a perfect example of this. The plot's as basic as they come in movies like this. A retired assassin forced back into his old life to settle a score with an evil crime lord. It's simple and streamlined, and the movie doesn't waste a single second trying to embellish something that fundamentally doesn't need it. The opening segment gives us enough of an insight into the main characters that we know exactly where they're at in life. Hutch and his wife are your classic bored, middle-aged couple, ground down by the monotony of daily life and growing increasingly distant from each other. It's the same basic premise as Harry and his wife from True Lies, and it makes the same point that perhaps we all need a bit of adventure and danger from time to time to stop us becoming dull and complacent. It's a decent, tried and true premise to give a bit of depth to our characters, but the movie never lingers on it for too long. And I love the fact that when Hutch tells his wife to take herself and the kids someplace safe, she actually fucking listens to him for once. In the hands of a different writer, the movie would have gotten bogged down in the relationship fallout of him lying about his background, or even had his family get taken hostage for the climax, but instead the movie's just like, nah, it'll be fine. And as a result, I'm fine with it too. As I mentioned earlier, it's not hard to spot the echoes of John Wick in this film. Both feature conflicted men with dark pasts, pulled back into the life they tried to leave behind in order to wage a one-man war against an evil Russian crime lord determined to kill them. Jesus, they were even written and produced by the same men. I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I guess. The difference though is in the detail of the two characters. Whereas John Wick was very clearly a man you wouldn't want to fuck with, even before he goes back into his old life, Hutch genuinely looks like an average Joe who wouldn't hurt a fly. And I have to give props to the casting department on this one. Bob Odenkirk is probably the last guy on earth you'd picture as a kick-ass assassin, but somehow he manages to switch from mild-mannered family man to brutal killer in the blink of an eye, and make it seem like the most natural transition in the world. I also love how he actually takes a real beating throughout the movie. Whereas John Wick basically plows his way through dozens of armed opponents without breaking a sweat, Hutch really gets fucked up along the way. He gets stabbed, punched, beaten, thrown through windows and shot, and somehow he just keeps going. Whereas Wick is cool, well-dressed and menacing, Hutch looks like he buys his clothes from the discount aisle in Target. All of these different elements come together to create a character that feels grounded and believable, with just enough complexity to draw you in and get you invested, before kicking it into no fucks given action modes. It's simple but undeniably effective. Ultimately, Nobody is a refreshingly simple, fun, unpretentious action film with enough violence and set pieces to keep me thoroughly entertained for its 90-minute runtime. It never takes itself too seriously, it doesn't dwell too long on the implications of its main events, and like any good action flick, the ending leaves open the possibility of a sequel, something I'd absolutely be up for. And really, it feels like the perfect antidote to the sanitized, neutered, overblown CGI shitfests masquerading as action movies today. It certainly isn't highbrow stuff, and I can't say it breaks any new ground in the action thriller genre, but to be honest, I don't fucking need it to. Every new movie doesn't need to reinvent the wheel and produce some revolutionary new viewing experience. Sometimes in life, it really is okay to just kick back with a burger and a beer. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.